I know from personal experience it can be tough to transition from a student nurse to a professional nurse. I remember when I started my first job in the emergency room, and I sat there twiddling my thumbs because I still had not successfully gotten an IV in and I was about to hit the ground running. Little did I know that there was such a thing as nurse residencies. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about HCA Healthcare's nurse residency program. This program supports newly graduating nursing students at the early stages of their careers. HCA Healthcare's year-long nurse residency program helps first-year nurses transition from the classroom to working in the field with confidence. Plus, nursing residents get access to a range of opportunities to learn from specialists in various areas, such as ER, critical care ICU, and surgical services. And there's a variety of other great benefits. Learn more today at careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. Again, that's careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. HCA Healthcare is an equal opportunity employer.
Welcome to the Nurse Leader Network podcast with your host, Chris Racinos. Wherever you're going on your nurse leader journey, we're here to help you get there.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Nurse Leader Network podcast. I'm your host, Chris Racinos, and today we have another amazing guest. Sharrica from the Starter Nurse Academy is here today with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Now, Sharrica, you have some amazing story. I know we have a similar history. So why don't we jump into the episode with you just telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what are you kind of currently working on?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Sharrica Miller, and I am the founder of Starter Nurse Academy. So we are a professional development company for new graduate nurses, mainly focusing on interviewing and resume skills. But my background, I've been a nurse 15 years. So I started off as a bedside nurse, working in pediatrics, went on and got board certified as a pediatric nurse practitioner, kept going on and got my PhD from UCLA in 2017. And so my full-time occupation is working as an assistant professor for a nursing school out here in Southern California, teaching pediatrics, mentoring, writing, and then also working on grants and different service things with foster youth and things like that. And of course, you know, as you and I have talked about in the way that we connected is that we both have that foster care background. So, and that definitely is a big part of what shapes who I am. So I spent 12 years of my childhood bouncing in and out of foster care. I think I had somewhat of a unique experience because I did bounce in and out. And so there were times when I was with actually both of my parents, but my dad sold drugs and my mother used drugs. And so it was just a lot of instability. Even though it was two parents at the house, it was just a lot of instability. So we would go back with them and last for maybe, 8, 9, 10 months. Then maybe my dad would go to jail. Then my mother would be so strung out and couldn't take care of us. Social workers would show up at our elementary schools, pull us out, send us to foster care for a year. They would do the parenting classes, get back clean, get us again, and that would start, all over again. So that's kind of who I am. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean, I've lived that foster care life too. And honestly, I don't know which is worse of the two evils, having to return and then think everything's okay for a short amount of time and go back versus just knowing like they're never coming back for you. So,
Ooh,
I'm,
yeah. I would say that knowing that things may be okay for a little while, what it does is definitely always keeps you on edge and always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And even as I become an adult, I've had to learn to not do that, because it's like when I would get home, I never could get too comfortable because I knew that other shoe would drop. You know what I mean? And that living on edge kind of followed me into adulthood, where even through college and working and things, I'm always like, waiting on a social worker to come and take it all away from me. So that is the only experience I know for sure.
wow. What do you think? What was your earliest memory of wanting to become a nurse? Like, did that background have anything to do with how or why you went into nursing?
I don't necessarily think it did. I think the only thing it did was I knew I wanted to be in a profession where I could make money, to be honest, like right away, right after college. So I think that part factored into it. But I wanted to go into nursing initially. My dad actually, so I lived in Compton was my last placement, and I was placed with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. And so my father was released from prison my senior year, came out of prison and was paroled right at the house where we were living. So I was super excited to have my dad back. He actually helped me get ready for prom, and it was like the first time that either of my parents had really been involved in my life. And then he got shot. He got shot in a drive-by shooting, I think near Anthony's Park, and one of my brothers died. Another one of my brothers got shot during that time, and my dad got shot. So I was at basketball camp when this happened. This is pre-cell phones, and my friends came to pick me up from the where the bus dropped us off for basketball camp. And my friend's dad just so happened to be a cop. So he's like, "Oh yeah, you guys were gone, 4th of July weekend." I had already been accepted to college. I didn't know what I was going to study, but they were like, "Oh yeah, it was a big shooting 4th of July weekend, and this dad and his son got killed. I can't remember their names, but their last names were Miller." And I was like. So then I realized like it was my dad. So I rushed home and I'm going to my grandma and she's like, "Yeah, your dad got shot. He's at Martin Luther King Hospital." So I went up there and I kept that. They were saying he got shot in the hand, but I heard head. So I was like panicking. So then I get to MLK, and that's why I love MLK now to this day. And it was a nurse there, and I don't remember what she did. I don't remember if she was the best IV hanger and the best medication passer, but like I remember how she made my family feel. I remember that she didn't make us feel like just another Black family affected by gang violence. And I just remember her taking me under her wing, when I told her I was a CNA, and I became a CNA just to make money to survive, in high school. And that was really what showed me like, oh, it is the nurses, that really have a lasting impact on families. And that's when I really knew I wanted to be a nurse.
Wow. That that your story like literally just gave me chills. I can't even imagine going through that. And I actually give a talk, and it's titled "Beautiful Things Are Born Out of Adversity."
Oh,
And it reminds me of kind of how I got started on my journey. And it was through a loss that, I kind of became a nurse. That's what put me on my journey to becoming a nurse and opening up my business. So I can see how, despite these things being beyond tragic, how they can have such a positive influence on the world.
wow. Beautiful things are born out of adversity. Love it.
Yeah. Oh man. Bring me forward to present day. What got you started with Starter Nurse Academy? Why did you decide to start that, and how was that born?
So, yeah, I think now, that I've become an adult, I got the PhD, and I think that was like really the first time that I like stopped. Like, I don't have to keep running. You know what I mean? I'd been running, running, running. I got to get this bachelor's. I got to work. I got to get a master's. I got to take care of the family. And so when I got the PhD was the first time I really like stopped and started like living for me. I lost like 55 pounds. I started going to therapy, started working on myself and starting to see that I didn't just have to survive anymore. That I could actually like thrive and do things above and beyond just going to work every day and like having a stable job and having a stable income. And so, believe it or not, what really inspired me to start my business was my mother. So she's now been clean and sober 11 years, ended up getting her two younger kids back and started writing books. And then she started opening a business. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, she opened up a boutique in Phoenix called Nickel City. And so I'm like looking like, damn, this lady has no college experience, no background, was a heroin addict for 25 years, came out of that and was able to start an actual thriving business that now actually has two different stores, okay, and a nail shop inside the store. So that was happening, right? So I'm still doing the safe route, doing nursing. Then my little sister, opened a business, right? And she's like 10 years younger than me. So she starts this business, Black on the Job, and she actually hires me to consult and start making classes for her, e-courses for her, and doing coaching for her and facilitating workshops. So I'm like, first of all, if they can do it, I can do it. I'm the one sitting here with a PhD, and then second of all of this work that I'm doing for my sister's business, I could be doing this for myself. So I love to tell people that my baby sister and my ex-heroin addict mother are the two that gave me the courage to start the business. And for a long time, I was the only person in the family that was working, that was legal, that had a job, had money, had an occupation. And then I got so comfortable in just being safe. And then they were showing me like we could take risk and own businesses. So that's kind of what had me do it in terms of getting the courage. The idea for the business really stemmed from working with senior nursing students, teaching leadership courses at UCLA, and seeing the gross lack of professional development that they had. That school was really focused on, this is how you pass meds, but no one was really teaching them how to interview, how to do their resume correctly. They may have had that like one day in class, that one workshop, that one mock interview. And then also what I really wanted to focus on initially was the soft skills that nurses need to transition to the bedside, being able to prioritize, critically think, delegate, therapeutic communication, assertive communication, etc. But the business kind of turned more towards interviewing and resume because that was the demand. And I saw that the new grads don't know that they need the other things yet. It's the hospitals that know that. So I kind of had to regroup. And that's kind of how I want to expand later, is more getting contracts with the hospitals to facilitate those sort of soft skills and emotional intelligence that is missing from their preceptorships.
Wow. So first of all, congrats to your mom. Oh my God, that is so amazing. Unfortunately, my mom never was able to escape her addiction and she passed from it. So I just want to say a huge kudos to your mom. That's great. And, I guess the saying's kind of true about like sibling rivalry and like how that gets you to motivate, right? I mean, my sister always constantly in competition too. And so I love that was a starting factor for what you're doing. Now, you mentioned something interesting and you talked about, the soft skills and wanting to go into that area with organizations. What do you think are some of the biggest gaps in terms of soft skills and others from the transition of new grad to, working?
Yeah, I think nursing school can be a bit technical based, very much so skill based. And especially from a nursing student's perspective, they are overly obsessed with learning the actual hands-on skills. And they don't realize that when they get to the floor on a typical day on a typical med-surg floor, maybe 20 to 30% of their day is done actually like hands-on skills and IVs and Foleys and stuff. And the rest of the day, they are coordinating the plan of care and moving it forward. And that is a skill in itself. And that skill isn't really taught because clinicals at nursing school is so disjointed. You know what I mean? It's like, go and take those vitals and come back. Let's pass these medications and come back. But they don't really get that chance to see the whole scope of what the nurse does. So I think there's a huge gap there in terms of, and I always say this, if I had a new grad or when I precepted new grads, I would much rather have a new grad, that was organized, that was assertive, that wasn't timid, that knew how to critically think, that could communicate on the phone, that, didn't cry every time a doctor said something mean to them. I'd much rather have that than a new grad that knows how to work the Alaris pump on the first day or put in a Foley, without being instructed. I don't care about it. I can teach you that, but I can't teach you how to communicate. And I work peds. I can't teach you how to communicate with this mother whose child is sick. I can't teach you how to, be assertive and go tell the physician that we need to clarify the orders. So I feel like those soft skills that's what really makes you a good nurse. And if you think about it, when you're precepting new grads, that's what really makes you think like, wow, I have a really good new grad. You don't think like, wow, the way they programmed that pump was like amazing. I've never seen that. what you really think is like, oh my God, you should see my new grad. Like she went there and talked to the family and he did this and she did that, And so those are the skills that really will make them successfully transition. And those are also the skills that will build them into becoming a nurse leader. And realizing that their role at the bedside is so much further than just the passing the meds and doing all that, that our impact as a nurse is beyond the bedside. And really, those soft skills, that's the beginning of you seeing how you can have an impact, how anybody could really learn how to technically pass meds. People are at home and pass meds. You know what I mean? But being that advocate, that leader, that critical thinker, that prioritizer, those are the things that make us who we are.
You have just totally hit the nail on the head. It makes me wonder if nursing education institutions should really consider having the very first class that the nurses take. We do this whole professional nursing class, but we don't talk about those types of things. So maybe really like level setting, like what your role really is, and like even putting it on like a pictogram or a graph or something, like this is the amount of time you're going to be needing and utilizing your technical skills, and this is the amount of time you're going to be utilizing whatever the other skills are, and that's how you should be going through this program in terms of your focus.
Yes.
Nursing is one of the only disciplines that has a transition to practice program. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts around like, is nurses like leading edge because we're recognizing that we need to prepare our nurses into practice? Or is it that we are doing such a terrible job at educating that we are one of the only disciplines that are not ready to hit the ground running when we graduate? What do you think?
I don't I think that we're really at the forefront because I'm not sure that anyone is really trained to enter a profession by the traditional college system. Now I think unless you're doing a vocational based system like you're doing automotive, you know what I mean, and you take a 1 or 2 year automotive class where you're actually working on cars the entire time, there is no real transition from that to now your first job working as an automotive, right? But when you go to school to be a psychologist, to be an engineer, to be really anything, I think that there is a disconnect between the classroom and the theory. And even if there's a practicum part, versus what it's actually like in the profession. And I would argue that it's like that in pretty much every profession. So I think in terms of us having a new grad residency program, that does put us at the forefront, right? But this also grew out of a need because we had a lot of nurse turnover. And so I think that, and I still feel very strongly that even with the new grad residency programs, that is a huge piece that is missing. That emotional intelligence part, those soft skills part, that's great that now we have these structured formal programs and this preceptor and this educator that looks after them and these theory courses and this, but who is teaching them, for example, how to deal with those nurses that seem cliquish or don't want to be their friend, or the physician that's like, why are you calling me in the middle of the night, what do you want? Who's teaching them how to deal with the family of a patient who's dying, and they or a kid that looks up to you, a 10-year-old in the PICU and says, am I going to die? Who is teaching them how to cope with grief when their patient dies, how to have self-care and balance between work and life, and how to compartmentalize and leave their work problems at work. And that who's teaching them that? So we can do all of this stuff and still have this awesome new grad residency program. But I think until we address that emotional intelligence side of nursing, we're going to have a lot of turnover, because we see now, even with the COVID crisis, that even those of us who are experienced hardened nurses are having mental health breakdowns because we've never seen anything like this. And so I think in our profession, that is important. And that really is the missing piece, even with these new grad residency programs.
Yeah, you are so right about that. I mean, I think, as an organization, as organizations, it's important to really look at all of those, like emotional intelligence, all of those different aspects and how they impact the patient outcome and the bottom line of the organization. Like, I think sometimes we think of those things as being like fluffy or soft. Well,
Yep.
obviously, right? We even call them soft skills,
Hmm.
when in actuality, those skills are really what is going to impact how your patients feel and experience. And we know that that patient experience is really, if your patients aren't experiencing good things, they're not coming back to you. So as an organization, I
Yeah.
feel like it's, the foundation and the backbone of providing care is making sure that your nurses are able to be emotionally intelligent and make those types of decisions and be able to set up their boundaries, right, for what's right and what's wrong for themselves and for their patients.
And I would argue that, that's important in life. honestly, how far we go in our careers, how well we do in high school, how well we do in a sport, really that those soft skills, that emotional intelligence it's what's gonna propel us through life and make us successful. With my daughter, who's only 4, and she's really smart, she can read really well and all this other stuff, and that's great. But what I really focus on are like coping skills, deep breathing, what to do when you're upset, how to be kind and compassionate, how to speak up and say no, and ownership over her body and setting boundaries. And so I want to teach her the coping skills so that the first time she fails a class, the first time someone breaks her heart, the first time she doesn't get accepted into a certain program, the first time she's under a lot of stress, that she has those tools and those skills to be able to overcome that adversity. So it's the same thing with a nurse. When you see a nurse that's lasted 15 years in the profession, you already know what they're about. You know their level of resilience. You know that they've been through it, right? And so when they're new grads, they still think nursing is about how well they can program the Alaris pumps. And they don't really realize, like, no, a lot of nursing is going to be about how well you can disconnect from what's happening at home, you know what I mean? And clock
Yeah.
in for 12 hours and deal with maybe this one nurse who you don't like and this one physician and all these different problems and these going through hoops and insurance and dealing with families and upset parents and blah, blah, blah. And it's really so much more of how well you are equipped to cope with that. Same thing for nursing school than it is for how smart you are. So I'm now starting with my daughter very young to try to prepare her to be successful in life, not because she'll be smart and can read well, but because she has grown the emotional intelligence to overcome adversity and obstacles in her life.
You are like the perfect parent on the earth. Like I need to start bringing the, like, we all think we teach our kids coping, but to be that intentional about it, I think is just brilliant. And I'm taking this course right now. It's a free course from Yale, and it's around happiness and joy.
Happiness. I
And
took it too. I took it too. Yeah.
oh, isn't it amazing? So, but in that course, it speaks to like America is like the most depressed country in the world, and we are
Yep.
getting more depressed as every year that happens. And so, just thinking about like suicides are on the rise, and behavioral health issues are on the rise. All of these things are on the rise, and what's happening really to our society. So, preparing our nurses to be able to really be able to manage and navigate through this, not only for their patients, but even more importantly for themselves, is just crucial. I'd like to actually pivot and just kind of learn some more about the Starter Nurse Academy. I know we both are PhD prepared, but when I started my program, I actually didn't start it in a PhD program. I actually started the DMP program and then found out about a semester in that it wasn't where I really wanted to go. Talk to me about your work around like helping people decide what track they might want to go into.
Definitely. So I have started Nurse Academy, but originally I was a nurse career coach and still am a nurse career coach. And I think I definitely specialize in helping people find their path, really listening well to their background, their experience, their education, their goals, and that being part of it. But also, and I, as you can tell, I'm really big on the mental health and the emotional health, but also in terms of what's important to them, what's their family life, what's their schedule, what's their finances, and then helping them decide really which path is for them, whether doing the DMP is the path for them or doing the PhD is the path for them. And that's kind of mostly the clients I've been working with lately are prospective doctoral students or even current doctoral students, and kind of helping them get through that pathway. So I kind of really, and I actually started doing this with a 2-hour masterclass, a DMP PhD masterclass. So I was doing this as Doc Miller Nurse Coach. That's my Instagram, is Doc Miller Nurse Coach. So this was kind of unrelated to Starter Nurse Academy. This was like my coaching, and then I have Starter Nurse Academy over here. And then what I did was took that 2-hour masterclass and made it into a formal e-course where I cover the differences between DMP and PhD, funding, how to articulate your research topic and come up with that early in the process, how to navigate it, how to contact advisors before you apply, what your resume and cover letter and things like that should look like. And so I'm really, really, passionate about helping nurses reach that goal of obtaining a doctorate if that's what they want to do.
That's phenomenal. I wish I had you in my life like 6 or 7 years ago when I was working on mine, because I was totally wasted I don't want to say I wasted a semester. I didn't waste a semester, but I would have totally gone the PhD route just because of what my interests were in terms of research. So you're a godsend. And for any of you out there that are contemplating a DNP or a PhD, you got to go check out Sharrica. So so I have some more, just topics around like education and things that I'd like to ask. And so you may or may not know, but I'm biracial. I'm half black and half white. And I wanted to just bring it up in the midst of where we're at. We're sitting in the middle of a pandemic. We have what feels like, honestly, like a civil kind of war going on.
Yeah.
I just went on a camping trip, and I had never, I guess because I live in Los Angeles, I had never really felt like I had been discriminated. I just hadn't felt that, because LA is just a different area, right? Like we're very,
Mm-hmm.
very diverse. But in this particular area, it was in Northern California, my family stood out very much so. And so we had this one incident where we went to a gas station, and my husband tried to have conversation with the guy, and he had been really chatty with all the other patrons. And then when we came up, like, he didn't want to sell gas to us. Like, he didn't want to engage in conversation. He
Wow.
rolled his eyes at my husband, and we were just like honestly, we were shocked. We just stood there and looked at each other like, what in the heck? And it made me think back to um, really like what's going on in healthcare, what's going on in nursing education. I know that I recently wrote a little piece for you at your university around healthcare disparities, around race, all of that kind of stuff. But I'd love to get your thoughts around, where in academia. Why don't we start there? What are some of the effects that you're seeing on the students? What are some of the effects that you're seeing maybe translated from what's happening in the schools into the workplace?
Yeah, I think, first off, that we're in the midst of a revolution. We really are, a worldwide global revolution. And there's no way that that doesn't spill into nursing, and nursing education. But in general, I think that there's definitely, I mean, we have strong data to support that as well, that there's an underrepresentation of certain populations and an overrepresentation of other populations. And nursing is just a really difficult field to get into and to navigate. And without coming from a certain background and having certain advantages, so coming from a certain background and having certain disadvantages makes it much more difficult to enter into a field such as nursing. And so then you get into the nursing classrooms, and where I teach, and I'm out here in Southern California, but I'm at a school that is less than 2% Black. And student wise and faculty wise, I knew going there that there was only one other full time Black tenure track faculty. And I knew what I was kind of, coming into, and I knew kind of what the situation was going to be. I think that I'm constantly having to prove my competence. I think that I can point to several situations on campus that were I felt discriminated against. And I think the takeaway message is that you have to stop and think whether or not you're being discriminated against because you're Black, or is it because of some other reason. So for example, after class was over, and this has happened to me on 3 separate occasions, after class is over, and sometimes I will sit at the front of the class at the computer and just try to finish up a little bit of work. And on 3 separate occasions, I have had other faculty walk in and maybe they have a class in an hour or two after, and they'll walk in and say, "Hey, excuse me, you're not supposed to be on those computers. Those computers aren't for students, they're for faculty." So
Wow.
it's like an automatic assumption that I'm not faculty. Now, I actually shared that with the faculty that I work with my nursing faculty, and their first reaction was, "Oh my God, I would love to be mistaken. It's because you're so young, Sharrica. I would love to be mistaken for a student." So again, I'm like one of the only Black people there. And so I think that is the problem, is that you're wondering like, well, maybe, maybe it's because I'm young. I'm only 38. You don't see faculty that are 38. And I've been teaching almost 10 years, so they mistake me for the students a lot. But then you're also like, yeah, but is it that, or is it because I'm Black, And then when you throw in the added complication of, I'm part of the LGBT community, I identify as woman, but I dress, how I feel comfortable in pants and blazers and button downs. And so that adds another layer to it. Like, not only am I Black and have natural hair locks, and I'm really super young, and I don't look like the typical, quote unquote feminine nurse. So no one really expects to see me when I first walk into the classroom. And then this has happened to me multiple times as well, where I've been driving around looking for parking, and we have a part on our parking where we can have faculty can valet their car if there's no other parking. And almost every time I pull up for that, they say, this is for faculty only. And I'm like, yeah, I know, thanks. And get out and hand them my key. And so I can count several incidences like that. Just even around my own neighborhood, walking around with my daughter to the park in basketball shorts and a t-shirt and a backwards hat, and had the police called on us twice. So I know this is not quite about nursing education yet, and I'll get there, but just saying that, this is my like day-to-day existence. And so when all of this stuff came to a head with George Floyd, it was literally like a boiler erupting, and everyone kind of saying enough. And it was so traumatizing for me to watch it on TV, to watch this Black man dying that really looked a lot like my father. And I took my daughter to the protest, and we talked about it, and it was a huge deal because, yes, we are in the midst of a revolution anyway, is my point. So when we're in nursing education, we have to be very intentional about what we are teaching our nursing students. And we have to be intentional about not necessarily generalizing and teaching them about a certain ethnicity, but rather how to self-reflect and turn that inward, identifying our own biases and addressing those and working through those, and how to be not just I'm not a racist, but how to be anti-racist, right? And also anti everything else, the other ways that people identify, by their religion, by their immigration status, by their sexuality, by their gender expression. And it's not so much about teaching them about Muslims and about individuals that identify as trans, but rather reflecting on our own biases, because we all have them, and then also reflecting on our own privileges that even I have, that even you and I have. And so I think that until we get to that point, we're really not going to move things forward if we just keep saying stuff like, be nice to Black people and be nice to people who are trans, but rather so dealing with our own biases and dealing with our own privileges and learning how to be anti those things is really what's going to move things forward.
So before all of this happened, the organization I currently work at, we actually, our chief compliance officer was getting her doctorate. And part of that was to deal with bias and implicit bias. And so we all did this implicit bias free test. And I'll put the test in the show notes if anybody's interested in doing it. And it's true what they say, like, you don't realize what your biases are. Cause I went into that thing like, oh no, I know what my biases are. And then I took it and I was like, oh, holy smokes, I guess I don't. So it was really interesting to take it and to be a part of that, be in that conversation prior to all of this happening. And what I found though is, the whole team took the test and then that was it. Right? Like, we took the test, we kind of found it out, and then the conversation ended, right? There wasn't a whole lot of conversation after that point up until everything that, recently has occurred. And so, it makes me wonder, as a nurse leader, aside from really understanding what your biases are and checking yourself, what are ways that you can continually be in that conversation? Like, what does it look like? What does the framework look like? What are things that we can do so that we're supporting inclusivity?
Yeah, and I think that once you was it that Harvard implicit bias test? Is that the
Yes.
one you guys took?
Yeah.
Okay. And so and I think that's interesting. And I'm not sure if I have the answer. I'm not sure, this isn't really necessarily my specialty. It's like my only specialty with this is really just being black. So I don't necessarily know like the science and what we should do, but I agree is that we take it and we're aware of it, and then what? And then does it change, how we interact with those populations? Does it, because I think what I've realized with these implicit bias tests is a few things, which is that number one, we all have them, even when you're from a marginalized group. And that number two, you could also have implicit bias towards the marginalized group that you are a part of. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I guess I'm not sure what that next step is. I hope that there are people out there that have done the research and have done the work and can tell us, but I just think for sure that that is a piece that's missing for sure at the university where I'm teaching, where my role is I am lead of the diversity support team. So my role is to create, an inclusive and diverse environment for our students, staff, and faculty. So I put on these symposiums, these diversity symposiums, and we have a keynote speaker and we have these breakout groups and things. And at one point, we kind of had a little bit of an ideological clash because I was being told that like this way that I wanted to approach the workshop was going to be too confrontational. And that if I was too confrontational when talking about racism, that I may offend some people, that I may turn some people off from the conversation. And I just couldn't understand how that was more important, right? Why is it more important for me to be mindful of how, let's just say, racist people are and how they feel about being confronted with their racism? Why is that more important than the ones who are actually experiencing the racism, and so that was kind of my time to put my foot down and like, look, you guys put me in charge of this for a reason. This year, last year we did a soft and fluffy workshop. This year we are going to do an implicit bias workshop and start working through the internal stuff and digging in here. And this year we're going to have the team come from the diversity and inclusion department because again, this isn't my specialty. Okay, I just know what it's like to be Black in America. That's my only qualification here, and bring them in to facilitate the workshops and really start to get some of this work. So to be honest, I don't know what is the next step. We're still trying to get to this part where we acknowledge our privileges and recognize our biases. I'll be happy if we just get there because none of my faculty, for example, that I work with realize how invalidated and dismissed I felt when the first thing we're literally giving examples, right? And the first thing they said was, "Oh, that's because you're young." And I'm, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, you guys have no idea, what I'm dealing with. And I want to tell you one other thing really quick is that when the whole George Floyd incident happened, of course, I, like other people, and not just Black people, but that was the difference this time. Like a lot of people were traumatized by that and like depressed, like really seriously in tears, traumatized and crying. And 9 days had passed. And that's why I'm glad we're not mentioning the schools, but 9 days had passed. And I felt like our School of Nursing hadn't put out a statement to our students. 9 days had passed. We're in the midst of riots, looting. It's on the news day and night. And how privileged are you that this is like literally someone emailed me around like day 4 and said, "Hi, Dr. Miller, I hope you're enjoying this weather." Like, are you watching the news? And so I kind of confronted, all of my faculty and the leadership, the people who are over me, and I was very transparent. I was like, I should have put out a statement. I'm lead of diversity support team, but I'm going to tell you guys why I haven't because I am tired. I'm doing the emotional labor. Like I am exhausted. So somebody else besides me needs to put out this statement and let our 1.5% of Black students know, as well as the rest of our students who are multi-ethnic and just care about Black people, that we support them. And the responses that I got were just further highlighting some of the ignorance. I got responses like, "Oh yeah, I can't sleep at night either." This is from white colleagues, all white colleagues, because I have a special needs child, and special needs kids are profiled by the police, so I'm scared too. I got phone calls are basically like I'm not racist phone calls, and like I have been in these neighborhoods and I work with Black people every day, and I'm doing the work at work, and my Black patients ask for me. And I'm just like, what does any of this have to do with anything? Like, you guys are so tone deaf that your responses to even this email is tone deaf. And it makes me wonder, and it kind of makes me separate a little bit I have to create an emotional boundary sometimes, because I will get exhausted trying to do all the work to explain to them why their responses were tone deaf. So instead I just said, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for reaching out. Because I couldn't do it.
Wow. Talk about like muffling any progress or stifling any progress. Yeah, it's disappointing to hear, and unfortunately it's not surprising.
Yeah, it was very disappointing.
Well, we've got a lot of work to do. I do actually have a guest scheduled that'll be coming on to talk about implicit bias. So that is her specialty. So I can share with you
Okay.
her info after our recording if you guys are interested in using her.
Definitely.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's this episode has been a journey. We've talked about like the highs and the lows and the scary and the unforgiving. I've had it's just such an amazing time listening to your story, getting your thoughts around everything that's happening, talking about your organization. Sharrica, this has been phenomenal. If people are interested in finding out more about you, where can they find you?
Absolutely. I'm mostly on Instagram. So my coaching page is Doc Miller Nurse Coach. And on there, I give a lot of content in terms of leveling up in your profession, different career options beyond the bedside, going back to school, etc. And then my other page is Starter Nurse Academy. So that is all aimed towards new grads. And I facilitate one free workshop every month. This month, we're doing it on bullying, how to deal with nurse bullies at the bedside. And then I have one paid workshop every month. And next month will be on bedside reporting, a 2-hour masterclass on bedside reporting. So they're all different topics related to new grads. They were mostly professional development related at first for them getting a job. And now I'm finally moving more towards this is how you thrive as a new grad beyond just the actual technical skill part of it. So they can find me on Instagram, Doc Miller Nurse Coach, or Starter Nurse Academy.
That's been awesome. Thank you so much for your time.